Alright, yeah, I think so. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you all for giving me an hour and a half of your time. My name is Yousef Shuwayhat. I am an actor by training, a drama teacher by career, sometimes stand-up comedian, and recently the deputy head of middle school in charge of student well-being at the Amman Baccalaureate School. Today's talk is about fake news. It's about something that's really important to us all, and hopefully by the end of today's session you will get a broader understanding of what fake news is, the different sub-varieties of it, and how they affect our lives on a daily basis. To begin with, a couple of disclaimers. First of all, this session is going to sound pretty pessimistic. I'm sorry about that. The good news is the world is doing great. In every possible way, by every possible metric, the world is doing better. Humanity is doing fantastic. We've eradicated a bunch of diseases, except measles, we'll talk about that. Fewer people live under the poverty line than ever before. Fewer people are dying of armed conflict than at any point in human history. So things are good. You may not get that impression watching this today, but it's okay. Just remember, things are good. Questions are completely allowed and very much encouraged. So come on in, ahla sahla. Come on in. Questions are very much encouraged, so if there's anything that I haven't covered, if there's anything that you're not sure about, please just, ahla sahla, come on in. If there's anything you're not sure about, please feel free to ask. Sorry, is the microphone not working? Okay, so wait 1 second. It's on. بس fish output على speakers. Sorry, let me just fix this. If you feel like asking a question, please do. I welcome it. If you feel like heckling, also please go ahead. But remember that I work with teenagers, so I wouldn't, push my luck. Finally, I am very much aware that offense is likely to be taken. Some of the things that I will talk about will be provocative. Hello, Salah, come on in. And it is very possible that at one point in this presentation you will feel like getting up and leaving the room because you are angry at something that I have said. If you do, I would like you to please keep two things in mind. One, hold on, let's wait till the end, let's have a conversation, let's talk about this. And two, I will mercilessly make fun of you if you do that. So please, stick around, let's have a conversation. Dialogue is how we progress as a species. Right, so let's begin. If we want to talk about fake news, welcome, ahla sahla. Bye. He left the oven on. Where does information come from? Where does knowledge come from? Well, if you ask the ancient Greeks, it comes from this, from people sitting together, talking, debating, thinking logically, looking at different ideas and exchanging them and listening to other people's views. That's where knowledge comes from. The ancient Greeks were lousy with ideas about this. Talk, debate, and you can refine your own ideas and you can get closer to the truth. And the only limit to this was the idea that technology could not serve us well enough. Back in those days, the average human being probably didn't move more than 50 kilometers from their place of birth in their lifetime. If that, you were born, raised, and died in the same village or the same city without ever going anywhere else. And then all of a sudden, horses, carts, travel. And then we had another big step when we invented writing and printing. And then we took it even further and we invented mass media, the radio, the television, and finally we crowned it all with the internet, and that's when we blew it. Because the internet is the greatest communication tool that humanity has ever seen. And what do we do with it? Hi, come on in. And what do we do with it? We spend our time on it arguing and posting cat photos. You know it's true. Now I'd like to just take a break from that for 1 second and focus on this painting. This is the School of Athens by Raphael. Or at least, that's what Google told me. I didn't bother to check this information. And there is a very important lesson for everybody to learn here. You're all sitting there, assuming that I know what I'm talking about. You assume this because you're here at a respected conference. You assume that somebody has vetted my information, has checked my presentation, and knows that all of this has been fact-checked and is 100% true. Well, nobody has. You have my word that I know what I'm talking about. You assume that I am being honest and not trying to trick you. Don't assume. This is the first big takeaway that I'd like you to keep today. This is going to ruin every session that you go to for the rest of this conference. But I really want you to think about this. Listen skeptically. When you hear somebody talking about something, don't just believe it. Have a bit of a skeptical outlook. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they didn't have the time to check whether this indeed is a painting by the famous Renaissance painter / Ninja Turtle Raphael. Maybe it's something by someone else. Something to think about. Anyway, going back to the internet. We have this amazing communication tool, and we have social media. And social media looks like this amazing chance for us to actually have debates with people, to have rational, reasonable conversations. But if you've ever been in a debate on the internet, on Facebook or in the comments section, aside from morbid, it's the only way to be sure. Credit goes to Ridley Scott and the movie Aliens. Really, it's toxic. People thrive with this anonymity that the internet gives you. Sure, sometimes you use your real name, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're just a fake name without a profile picture. You're anonymous. Nobody knows who you are. There are no consequences for what you do. And as a result of that, people become absolutely horrible. They become very, very mean. They bring you down. They assume you're stupid. And they tell you that to your face. So, the internet has not succeeded. This democratization of information, where, hello Salah, come on in. This democratization of information, where everybody has the right to speak and everybody has the ability to speak their opinion, is not a valid way of getting information. So what do? Well, for the most part, we turn to experts. We turn to authorities. People who we know, people who we know a lot about a particular topic. Great, so far. Appealing to authority, finding people who know what they're talking about is a great way to focus on learning things from a reputable and reliable source. Unfortunately, there's two things that are wrong with that. One, when somebody is an authority, they may be wrong, they make mistakes, they're fallible, they're human, just like the rest of us. And two, is a bit of a danger, because we tend to look at these authorities, experts in a particular field, as if they are experts in every field of life. And that is a problem. Exhibit 1. This gentleman, that's absolutely fine, don't worry about it. This gentleman is named Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Does anybody here teach economics, finance, anything? No? Eclectic bunch. Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Black Swan. It is a very famous and influential book where it comes to economics, and it talks about how markets deal with very strange freak occurrences, like a market crash or something like that. Very well-respected economist. The problem with Nassim Taleb is that he holds very unorthodox views when it comes to other areas, especially when it comes to the field of biotechnology. And he often gets into these massive debates online with people, and any time that somebody disagrees with him, he blocks them and accuses them of being a paid shill.
He accuses people of being paid by companies, by corporations, because they disagree with him. Exactly. Thank you very much. And that's one of our keywords for today, and you win a prize. I'm just kidding. There's no prize. Sorry. You get free water and a notepad. Thank you. Don't say I never get you anything nice. So the man is probably not the best form of authority. He's a brilliant economist, but when it comes to other things, he's probably not somebody you want to listen to. So where does that leave us? Well, to understand this a bit more, we need to understand our own brains. Now, our brains developed over a very long time period in order to be good at one thing, keeping us alive. That's really why they're there. And as a result of this, our brains make certain mistakes. They have these things called cognitive biases. Say, for example, you're asleep at night and you hear a noise in the kitchen. What is the first thing you think? There's a noise in the kitchen, and this is actually, I'm not being rhetorical. What do you think? Mouse. Burglar. Yeah, one of your kids. Thank you, the only person who is not actually freaking out to begin with. But that is very rare, because what our minds are automatically wired to think is danger. Because back when we were primitives, back when we were living out of caves, when you heard something rustling in the bushes, the people who thought, it's probably nothing, were the people who got eaten and didn't live long enough to have kids and, pass on their genes. The people who were like, it's probably a saber-toothed tiger, I'm going to go hit that with a stick, were the ones who survived long enough to have kids. And so that's how natural selection works. We ended up as the most paranoid offspring of the most paranoid parents that have ever been paranoid on the face of the planet. So, how did we get back here? So, sometimes it arrives at snap judgments. There's a burglar, there's a mouse, there's something that I don't like, there's something dangerous that I worry about. Sometimes we're very good at complex analysis, where we think about something. Is this really a saber-toothed tiger? No, of course not. Those are extinct. They've been extinct for 10,000 years, as all of you, I'm sure, know. But in either case, we are able to come to the wrong conclusion. Whether it's a snap judgment or whether it's something that we think about, our brains are very good at rationalizing absolutely anything. So, both of these processes are likely to lead us to very bad decisions. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. Because what we're going to look at a bit more is how we can circumvent these specific bad decisions. We're going to talk a little bit about logical fallacies. We've already looked at argument from authority, the idea, if you've ever been on the internet ever, and as teachers, I'm sure you've seen some quote about education by Einstein. Yes? Of course. It goes without saying. Why? Because Einstein was a very smart man. He was probably the most brilliant physicist who has ever lived. And so we assume, like we did with Mr. Talib, that he knows what he's talking about when it comes to anything in the world. Oh, well, Einstein said this, so it must be true. Well, no. He knows everything there is to know about physics. Well, back in the day, he was brilliant at physics. But maybe he's not the sort of person to take interior decorating tips from. Let's keep that in mind. The gambler's fallacy is a very interesting one as well. We tend to think in patterns. So the gambler's fallacy basically goes like this. I've been playing this game and I've been losing. I've lost once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. My luck has got to change. Sometimes it doesn't. There's a 50-50 chance. Any mathematicians in the house? Yes, sir. Yes, ladies. Is that correct? It's always a 50-50 chance, right? Yeah. Good. That's probability. That's how it works. The argument from ignorance is one of my favorites because basically it goes like this. I don't know any other explanation for this phenomenon. I don't have knowledge of any other explanation for this. Therefore, the one thing I do know must be true. And if you're familiar with this gentleman who hosts a TV show on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens, his entire thing, this guy has made a living out of having two things: ridiculous hair and an ability to relate anything to aliens. So the pyramids, oh, I don't know how they did that. Must be aliens. Stonehenge, I don't know how they built that. Must be aliens. That's basically, spoiler, that's literally every episode of his show. There, saved you 500 hours. And that's a problem, because that's one of the ways in which we think. We assume that just because I don't know any other way this could have happened, therefore this must be the only explanation. So it's very, very important to question why we reach some of our conclusions. How are we doing for time? Doing well. Come on in, ahla sahla. Join the party. Another thing, no? I should really stop calling out to people, shouldn't I? Anybody here watch Game of Thrones? Yeah. Yeah. Read the books. Is this Eerie? What's her name, the character? No, she's one of Daenerys' handmaidens. But what is her name? Is it Eerie? Anybody? Okay. You guys are a lot of fun. You absolutely should be. It's fantastic, by the way. The books are really good as well. Okay. Well, to each their own. Another famous logical fallacy is called the Bandwagon Fallacy. This character, we'll call her Eerie for now, has this saying. Every time she will come up with some ridiculous factoid, and she will tell the character that she serves, Daenerys, it is known, Khaleesi. As if that somehow justifies the fact that she is talking about complete rubbish. Take, for example, this proposition. The earth is round. Yes? Up until recently, this was not very controversial. Unfortunately, that's why I'm in a job. So a person will say, oh, but look at how many different people believe the earth is flat, as if that somehow justifies this belief. It doesn't matter how many people believe the earth is flat. We know for a fact there are people who have been in space and looked down at the earth and seen it to be a sphere. We have entire sectors of industry that are built around the fact that the earth is round, and that's how GPS works. We know exactly that's how we locate ourselves. That's how aviation works. So we know for a fact the earth is not flat. It doesn't matter that there are 20,000 people going to a flat earth conference every year. These people are still wrong. This is also a problem when it comes to how we consume information these days. We rely a lot on social media to get our news and opinions. And this is not as much the case when it comes to young learners as much as it has to do with us and our age and our parents. So we tend to get a lot of our news through Facebook and Twitter. Just by a quick poll here. How many of you have read a news item on Facebook in the last week? All right. How many of you read a news item on Facebook every day? It's convenient. It's very convenient. It pops up in your feed, and oh, look, something interesting. The thing to remember, well, two things to remember, is that these articles don't show up by accident. Now, this is not a conspiracy. Facebook actually has algorithms that make sure that the content that pops up in your feed is something that you're going to be interested in. They want you to click, they want you to share, they want you to like, because that's their business model. The longer you're on the site, the more advertising they can sell you, the more information they can gather about you and sell to advertisers. Welcome. That's their business model. Also, what this does is it creates something called a digital echo chamber, where all the things that you are being exposed to on a daily basis fall within the sphere of your own beliefs. they will be things that you agree with. They will go with your politics. They will go with all the things that you already feel are right. Not only that, you curate your content. By liking certain things, you tell Facebook what it should give you more of. Plus, your social circle, the people you talk to, are people who you mostly agree with anyway. Otherwise, you have the block function. When you come across somebody who's saying something that's so outrageous that it gets you angry, you unfriend or block that person. And you end up in this echo chamber where everybody you know, everybody you talk to in this digital sphere is someone you agree with, is someone who thinks exactly the same way, well, maybe not exactly, but for the most part thinks the same way, holds very similar views, and you don't hear any dissent. And this can become very dangerous because you will become convinced that this is reality. How we interact with other people shapes our view of what reality is. And that can become dangerous, especially if you subscribe to one of the more dangerous beliefs we're going to be talking about later. Right. Let's talk a little bit about the different types of fake news that exist out there in the world. Many of these definitions may not be new to you, but it's useful sometimes to just get an idea of what they are. Back after a break. So, fake news are fake stories that appear to be news, spread on the internet or using other media, usually created to influence political views or as a joke. A reference from Cambridge there. That's a pretty good definition in a nutshell. This gentleman on the left, your right, is Stephen Colbert. Anybody familiar with him? He's a comedian, started off in the early 2000s on a show called The Daily Show, which is a satirical news program. And he played a character. The character is a conservative American news pundit. And what happened with Colbert is that he got given his own show, The Colbert Report, where he pretended to be this ultra-conservative individual. Come on in, ahla sahla. No, you're fine, come on in. And he coined a term called truthiness. He has a very famous speech where he talks about where truthiness comes from. It comes from the gut. And he goes on to say that, I trust my gut. Did you know that there are more nerves in your gut than there are in your brain? Look it up. I bet you, and some of you will have looked it up and said to me, yeah, I did look it up, that's wrong. Well, you probably looked it up in a book. I looked it up in the only place that matters, in my gut. This is funny, but actually, it's kind of terrifying as well because that's how people think. That is exactly our thought process. We accept facts based on whether or not they feel right. Our process for accepting new information is not as rational as we like to think. We all have our version of truthiness. We all look at information and try to determine whether or not it's true based on previous experience, but also on this gut feeling of whether or not this may be true or not. And there are ways to manipulate this, especially when it comes to fear, which is a very powerful motivator. And that brings us to another term that we have, post-truth. This became very famous when, I don't know if you remember this, 2 years ago, President Trump's advisor, Kellyanne Conway, went on CNN to say that Trump's inauguration was the biggest one in history ever. And when they told her that fewer people showed up than previous inaugurations, she said, well, that's your fact. We have alternative facts. And that's where the term post-truth came from, that we live in a world where people can brazenly lie about something that is completely obvious. They can call a dog a cat and brazenly look at you and say, this is not a dog, this is a cat, even though you can clearly see that it goes woof. And likes to, grab a stick when you throw it. It likes to play fetch. So this is the sort of world we live in, where facts really don't matter that much as who is speaking them. Let's look at some definitions. One of the more famous ones is a parody. A parody is a non-factual item that is usually meant to mock. It makes fun of real things. I actually posted something on Facebook yesterday, which was a joke. It was from a news article from The Onion. Does anybody know The Onion? Yeah, it's this fantastic satire site. And my mother this morning commented on that, going, "Seriously?" And I had to explain to my mother that, no, this is a joke. This is not real. But that's the thing. People will look at the headline. They will not read further. They will not be familiar with the source of the article, and they will assume that it's true. They will be outraged, and they will share it, and they will tell people about it. Of course, another wonderful site like this is Al-Hudud, which is an Arabic language-speaking one, which does fantastic satire. They had one recently about how the government has decided to raise fuel prices, even though they have gone down around the world, just to show that they have that they make their own decisions. Again, fantastic. But people take that seriously. They assume sometimes that this stuff is real, and that is fake news. They share it as if it is actually true. Propaganda is when it becomes politically motivated, when people are doing it in order to influence public opinion, in order to influence politics. This has become a very big thing recently in the news following, again, Donald Trump's election, where there was a lot of fake news being circulated, and still is, about him, about his opponents. There's also been a lot of that going on with the Brexit vote in the UK, where people, again, were fed a lot of false information about issues of varying importance. We have an hour 20. We have 50 minutes, right? All right, thanks. A conspiracy theory, which I believe you brought up earlier and which we're going to talk about, is a set of unrealistic beliefs. It usually has a component that has to do with authority and power. And when it comes to conspiracy theories, the person who talks about them usually believes them. This is just a slight thing that we're going to get into in a little bit. It usually involves somebody powerful trying to suppress something, usually the truth. So for example, flat earthers believe that NASA is hiding the fact that the earth is flat, presumably to sell more plastic globes. I don't know. Must be a multi-billion-dollar industry. Woo and pseudoscience. Woo is usually a supernatural or magical explanation for alternative beliefs. Crystal healing, if you've ever come across it, is a perfect example of woo. This crystal resonates at the sacred frequency of 48 gigahertz, which is the body's natural frequency that allows it to heal somehow using magic. This is woo. This is also an example of pseudoscience, where people will use science-y sounding terms to make you think that something is real. Again, with the crystals, the 48 gigahertz, the frequency of your body, and all that sounds scientific, uses scientific terminology, but in fact is just complete bunk. There is no such thing. Before I move on, do we have any questions about this? No, we're good? Checking for understanding like a good teacher. Let's play a game. So, this is for everybody to take part in. How did I do that? This is a game called Factitious. It's available on the internet, and they update it every year in order to have new stories. Now, there are several levels to this. Easy is middle school level, medium is high school, and hard is courage. Let's not be too optimistic. Let's start with the medium level. And I'd like you to tell me whether you think these news items you're about to see are real stories or fake news. So let's start with this very first one. Okay, this is medium 2, so this is at about high school level. So, this is an article about a robot that gives better hugs than humans. And you can read a little bit about it. Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems presented this paper about emotionally supporting humans through robot hugs. Is this real or is it fake news? What do you think? Reading this, looking at this, do you think this is real or do you think it's fake? It's a parody. All right, so fake news? What do we think? Fake news, real? Real? Yeah, but apparently this is the Max Planck, what is it? Institute for Intelligent Systems. Interesting. It's the famous physicist, that's right. The guy who, was it quantum theory? Yeah. Okay. So you think fake? Okay. Yeah?
Before identity determination, because sometimes the real world is weird. And because I'm familiar with this, there's a button that lets us know the source. Can I see it?
Yes, there is. Is it at the bottom here? Yep. The source is the Sunday Times in the UK. No? Gut feeling, truthiness. Go from the gut. True or fake? Fake? Okay, let's find out. Survey says that is an actual news article. That is actually real. Yes. So this is actually a legitimate article from the Sunday Times that is factual.
The teddy bear hug is much better than a human.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe there's a robot that can actually give you a better hug than a human. Interesting. Within certain controls. Let's have another one. So, Facebook thought that quotes from the US Declaration of Independence were hate speech. We the people, etc., etc. So what do we think? It seems all content is not created equal. A Facebook algorithm categorized parts of the Declaration of Independence as hate speech and took down excerpts of it ahead of the 4th of July. What do we think? Fake? Fake, real? Mostly fake, though. Okay. Real. Okay. You guys have no idea. You're just guessing. Okay, let's go for fake. No, this was actually a real news article. This actually happened. Facebook automated algorithms found bits of the Declaration of Independence to be hate speech. Interesting. Let's have another one. Actually, I'm going to reboot this, and let's go a little bit further and go with the hard level. Let's go for a college level bit of fake news. Let's see how well we're doing. So far, we've been wrong on each single one. So, Secretary of State John Pompeo, I think, Mike Pompeo, went to meet with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, who Trump refers to as Rocket Man. And according to the story, he brought him a CD of the song Rocket Man by Elton John. True? True? Everybody, yes? False. Okay, fake. Okay. This is a great thing about the Trump administration, because you have no idea. Everything is expected. Even something as ridiculous as this, you're like, yeah, sounds right. And this is actually fake news. All right, let's have one more. Just one more. Kremlin is amused by report, amused between quotation marks, that Russia is listening to Trump's phone calls. True. True. Okay, good. So you guys think this is true? And it is indeed a real news article. The Kremlin, well done, you got one right. But the whole point of this, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that this stuff is very difficult to tell apart. It really requires a lot of hard work and a lot of thinking to actually discern reality from the lies. And it's not that easy. I mean, this is a room full of highly educated educators. And we got like 1 out of 5 or out of 6 questions wrong. Now, obviously, these are done in a way to make them seem unrealistic. The point is to try and fool you and challenge you. But still, in a panel about fake news at an education conference with highly educated individuals talking about this for the last 45 minutes, we still managed to get fooled. Now, just imagine how difficult this must be for our kids who have grown on the internet, who are not necessarily taught to discern the difference. So why should we care? Why is this important? And this is something that somebody asked me at the very beginning. Okay, so what's so bad about this? Okay, so the kids don't know if it's a joke or if it's real. Is that really such a terrible thing? Well, yes. This is a pause for dramatic effect. Yes, it is. Let's look at what's going on in the world of education. So the OECD, which runs the PISA rankings, is thinking of adding components that have to do with fake news to their curricula in order to help kids navigate the digital world. The IB is talking a lot about this. They're talking about ATL skills, approaches to learning skills, and why they're important when it comes to helping students navigate fake news and the digital landscape. We've got all sorts of fact-checking and debunking sites that have risen to prominence over the last few years because people keep asking these questions. Is this real? Is this fake? Did this happen or didn't it? What's the harm? Well, up here we have 3 examples of individuals. I don't think I would actually call them people. And this is where we get to the pessimistic part of the talk. So these 3 things, Andrew Wakefield, David Avocado Wolf, and Alex Jones. I do not like these people very much, and the reason will become clear in a second. So Andrew Wakefield is the person who is probably single-handedly responsible for the whole vaccines cause autism myth. He started this in the 90s, I think 1994. He published an article which was based on absolutely no scientific evidence. He went to a birthday party and took blood samples from the kids there, and then published this piece in The Lancet, which is a reputable medical journal, but which decided to publish his work because they wanted to listen to more viewpoints. They wanted to be open-minded and give him a platform. But then he starts saying things like vaccines cause autism. And as a result of that, vaccination rates for things like measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough, chicken pox, all these diseases, they start plummeting. In the last 3 years, tens of thousands of little children have died, babies, because their parents believe so much in Wakefield stories that they decide not to vaccinate. And as the vaccination rates drop, so do levels of herd immunity, and these diseases come back. It's the most vulnerable people who are harmed by this. Kids who are too young to be vaccinated, people with compromised immune systems due to disease, old people, people who can't get vaccinated for a bunch of different reasons. These are the people who are affected by this. Wakefield is responsible for tens of thousands of deaths affecting the most vulnerable parts of our population. Children who don't get a say in what happens to them, but whose parents, out of fear, out of the best intentions, they want their kids to be healthy. But they have been fooled by him and people like him into putting their children's lives in jeopardy. That is the harm of fake news, ladies and gentlemen. That is what it does. It kills people. If you've been on the internet, you will have come across David Avocado Wolf. You may not know what he looks like, but you've come across one of his, thank you, one of his memes. I don't know why this keeps doing it. Usually it's some trite inspirational thing with a picture of nature for a background. Why live in the city when you can go back to nature? / David Avocado Wolf. He sounds like some hippie who is completely harmless, except that Wolf does this thing where he sells fake cancer cures on his website. So people who are desperate, people who might stand a chance with actual medical intervention, end up forgetting about that medical intervention to take his all-natural supplements and healthy juices. These people end up dying, and he takes their money. And he continues to do this, and he continues to market these fake cures to people who are desperate for them. And he does this by appealing to a conspiracy that the medical industry is not interested in saving your lives. But he knows the secret. There is a cure to cancer, and he has it. And if you just listen to him and pay him $400, he will cure your cancer, and you will be okay. What sort of a human being do you need to be in order to do that to people? Not a very good one. Alex Jones, conspiracy radio talk show host. You may have come across a quote from him going, "They're turning the frogs gay." No? Anybody come across that? Yeah. He basically believes in every possible conspiracy theory in the world. And the problem with Jones is that he is very dangerous. He doesn't believe any of the things that he's saying, at least in a lawsuit that has to do with custody for his kids. His lawyer told the court that, no, he's not crazy. He doesn't believe these things. He's just pretending to. He's an entertainer. Well, his entertainment is all about poking holes in reality. So have you heard of the Sandy Hook massacre? 26 preschoolers were killed by a gunman. Jones tells his followers that they're all actors, that this never happened, that this is all part of a government conspiracy to come and take your guns. And so the families of the victims have been harassed by Jones's followers, who call them up, who call them liars, who want them to tell the truth. These are people who have lost their children in a horrible incident, and they are now being harassed even more by people who follow Jones. There was also this incident to do with a restaurant in Washington called Planet Ping Pong. One of Jones's followers walks into the restaurant and takes everybody hostage with an automatic weapon. The reason? Well, he heard on Jones's show that a bunch of Democratic politicians in the US, led by Hillary Clinton, are running a pedophilia ring from the basement of that restaurant. So this guy goes in with a gun wanting to save those kids. Only problem? The restaurant doesn't have a basement. The man realizes this, feels like a complete fool, and hands himself over to the police. Nobody got hurt. But just imagine that this is where this sort of conspiracy thinking will lead. This is the sort of danger that it puts people in. So why do people believe conspiracies? And this is a big one. It comes down to three things. It comes down to feeling disempowered, to feeling weak, and to not really understanding how the world works. These are the three things that are most commonly reasons for people to believe conspiracy theories. Also, they're held in clusters. You're very unlikely to believe one conspiracy theory. If you believe one, you're very likely to believe several of them together and to tie them all together. So it's like a gateway drug, if you will. You believe one conspiracy, you believe many of them. So when it comes to conspiracy theories, just say no, not even one. All right? It's usually correlated with conservative views, but bear in mind that whether you are on the left or the right of the political spectrum, you are as likely to hold a conspiracy theory. And there are different types of conspiracy theories that appeal to different sides of the political spectrum. So that's an interesting one. They're quite universal. They're much like a disease. So I have a question for you. Which group of people that we are familiar with are most likely to feel weak, feel disempowered, and not understand how the world works? Our students. And they are especially vulnerable to believing in this sort of thing. Oh, sorry. So, since there's so much at risk, let's talk solutions. Let's talk about practical steps which we can use in order to help our students navigate these sorts of things. So, I've plagiarized something from the IB. The IB has this thing called the IB Learner Profile, which, by the way, they took from somebody else when they bought the primary years program. And they're a list of 10 attributes that are supposed to create the international learner, somebody who is able to navigate all of life's difficulties and all of life's challenges successfully. I've taken them and I've done a little bit of tinkering with them. So one of the IB profiles is inquirers. Students should be inquirers. But it's important that students are inquiring from a number of different sources, not just from the first result that comes up on your Google search. Look at a couple of different sources. See what they say, compare them. Our students should be thinkers, but they should be thinkers who are looking at things from different perspectives, who are critical of their own biases. What do I believe? Is this why I believe this? Or can I objectively say that this is real? We want them to be balanced, but we don't want them to have a false sense of balance. A NASA scientist and some guy named Jim Bob who believes the earth is flat are not equal. Their ideas do not deserve equal time. One of these people is right and the other one is wrong. There are facts. The fact is the earth is not flat. We have lots of evidence for that. We should not be listening to somebody who claims the earth is flat simply because we want balance in our media. This is a false balance. This is not an idea that is worthy of our time. We want our students to be principled, but not dogmatic, not so focused on a particular precept or a particular way of thinking that they ignore all other information that contradicts this, because that's what an echo chamber is. We want them to be caring, but also able to detach their compassion from their thinking. Sometimes we believe things because they appeal to our emotion, going back to the anti-vaccine movement. These people want to do the best for their kids, and they are motivated by fear for their children, which is a very human emotion. But sometimes you need to put that aside and think, am I thinking clearly? We want them to be knowledgeable about all sorts of things, not just one specific area. We want them to know about different topics. But we also want them to not be arrogant about their knowledge and think that, hey, I know everything there is to know. I have nothing new to learn. We want them to be communicators who will talk to other people and acknowledge the fact that, you know what? I may be wrong. I'm fallible. I'm just human. We want them to be risk takers who are able to step out of their comfort zone and listen to ideas and opinions that might be against everything they believe in, but that they will listen and maybe decide if it's true or not. We want them to be reflective, considering past decisions and reviewing their opinions, and we want them to be open-minded. And I'll preface that with a quote by a brilliant British author named Terry Pratchett. The problem with an open mind is, of course, is that people will insist on coming along and trying to put things in it. And that can be a dangerous thing. It's important to be open-minded about new perspectives, but it's also important to not let anybody cram anything in there. And people misunderstand open-mindedness, because we need to be a little bit skeptical. I like this quote. I'm using quite a lot of them in these 3 slides. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Think about it, review the evidence, and then make up your mind. This, by the way, is not a quote by Aristotle, however much the internet will try to convince you that it is. But in this case, unlike the painting, I actually looked this up. I actually did go around and I found this, I used this site called Quote Detective, which actually finds the original source material and tells you if this is actually a quote by that person. And this was definitely not by Aristotle. We don't know who it's from, but we know it's not him. A useful tool for this was created by this gentleman named Carl Sagan. He was a very famous astronomer, philosopher, physicist. He died in 1996. He wrote the original series Cosmos. Yeah, this was like the highlight of my childhood because it talked about exploring our solar system and about science and the history of it. We're going to look at that, but first, very briefly, remember this. This is, his name is written down there, Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher and mathematician who said, "I would never die for my beliefs because I might be wrong." And that's an interesting thing about being principled but not dogmatic. You know what? Maybe I am wrong. I need to be humble enough to accept the fact that I may be mistaken. Right. I'll go through these very quickly. You can find them online. They're 9 points. Wherever possible, when it comes to a fact, there must be some sort of independent verification. You need to find somewhere to back up these facts. Don't just accept them as they are. Don't accept that what I'm telling you is true. Try to find out for yourself. Look at another source. Encourage debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents, by people who know what they're talking about. Yes, authorities can be mistaken, but when you have a number of them who are all debating and trying, these are more trustworthy people who are debating and calling each other out and saying, you know what, I don't think that point you made is right, then you're more likely to have real information. And then he even talks about arguments from authority being dangerous, that sometimes people can be wrong. Come on in, join the party. Have more than one hypothesis. Try to think of alternative explanations so that you don't fall into the trap of argument from ignorance. See if you can come up with another explanation for something. Try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis because it's yours. This is a difficult one. When we come up with an idea, because it's ours, because we came up with this explanation, it almost feels like your baby. I created this. This is my opinion. I'm so proud of it. Look at it. Take pictures of your little opinion and you post them on social media for everybody to see. 3 years ago, this was my opinion back then. Don't be afraid to let go of them. Don't be afraid to acknowledge the fact that you're wrong. And this is difficult for us as adults. Imagine how it is for a child who is just now trying to understand the world, and they're like, yes, I finally understand something. And then an adult comes along and they're like, actually, no. It's difficult to accept. Quantify, which means find data where appropriate. If there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work, which means that there has to be a logical development of ideas. Occam's razor, based on a 14th century philosopher, I believe, William Occam, who came up with this brilliant principle. And this is something that I highly encourage you to teach your kids. If you have two hypotheses that explain the information equally well, the simpler one is usually true. So, what is more likely? That there are 3 bottles of water here because there are 3 seats and the organizers of this conference decided that that would be the correct number for the people sitting here? Or that this bottle is not in fact a bottle, but is in fact an alien life form that came to Earth and wanted to spy on this forum and wanted to listen to my talk for some reason, and disguised itself in the form of a bottle of water. Which of these two is more likely as an explanation for why this bottle of water is here? I would hope the first one, yes. I would very hope the first one. I would very hope nobody's going to say the second one. That, please don't drink your aliens. That is why Occam's razor is such a useful thing. And finally, always ask whether the hypothesis can be falsified. If I tell you that I have a dragon in my garage, you could easily say, okay then, let's see it. Yeah, let's go to your garage and let's see the dragon. But if I tell you that this dragon is invisible, it's intangible, and it can only be heard and seen and perceived by me, then that becomes unfalsifiable. You have no way of testing this hypothesis. And if it's unfalsifiable, then you can't prove it, and you can't disprove it. So it becomes meaningless. Why would you want to have a debate with somebody who has a dragon in their mind? Very quickly, as we close up, I'd like to bring your attention to something called the Backfire Effect. This caused quite a stir in the academic community a few years ago when these two researchers named Nyan and Reifler discovered that when you test people who have certain conspiracy beliefs and you give them information proving them wrong, instead of them going, oh wow, I was wrong, they will go, I'm not listening, basically. This is called the Backfire Effect. People who held certain beliefs and were told and were given evidence that their beliefs were wrong, doubled down. They refused to believe the new information. They refused to believe that they were wrong. They, in fact, believed in their own opinions more than they did originally. They held their beliefs even more strongly. Now, there's been a bit of controversy about this, and there's been a lot of further debate and further research into it, because sometimes you don't find the backfire effect. Sometimes you do. So it could be that this is actually an artifact of bad experiment design, or it could be a very real thing. Right now, we're trying to figure that out. But keep that in mind. Sometimes giving people information will not actually convince them. So finally, we talk about our responsibility as teachers. We've got the tools. We understand the situation. What do we need to do for our kids? Well, we have a duty to be accurate with our information, but we also need to be able to debate that information. If we get challenged on a point, we either need to be able to convince the student that it's true, or acknowledge that, you know what? I don't know. And this is a very important thing to model for our students. I don't know. I do not have all the answers. But you know what? We can find out together. I do know everything, by the way, but like just for everybody. Yeah, of course, obviously. But when it comes to everybody else, you know. We need to check our own facts and biases. We need to make sure that we are checking the things that we are telling our kids as much as possible, that the information we give them is legitimate, that it is something that we know for a fact is true. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not giving them our bias, which is there. We all have biases, we're human. But we need to at least be aware of what our biases are. We shouldn't be authorities. We should be mentors, we should be guides, we should be leading. We're walking with the kids hand in hand in their journey of education and learning and discovery. We should not be telling them that this is the way to go. And we need to help our students learn by teaching them to be independent. Independent of us, independent of other authorities. Help them search for their truth on their own. Now, this is not just a presentation that I want you to go out there and forget and maybe look back on in a couple of days. This is a call to action, ladies and gentlemen. This is quite possibly one of the most important things, one of the most important skills that we can teach our children. We have a responsibility towards them to send them out into the world as fully equipped as we possibly can, because otherwise, the consequences can be terrifying. Thank you very much. Right, so now we come to the fun part, which is we've got about 18 minutes left and then a coffee break. I would love to open it up to questions. And we already have our first one. Sorry, Lama, yes, my assistant Lama will be handing out microphones.
I think I would like to add another point to the ideas you suggested for teachers to do, and that is to be courageous enough to challenge the appeal to authority when that authority is masquerading under the guise of religion. In particular, I have an example in mind where we had this guy who claims to be representing religion, and he came to Jordan to give lectures about various scientific things, and he claimed that a factory in Switzerland and he is promoting the medicinal applications of the urine of camels. زغلول النجار. We have to be courageous enough to challenge this as complete baloney. That's number one. Number two is to keep the meaning of words clear. Because sometimes I feel that the word theory is deformed.
Misrepresented.
Exactly. So, and they ask you, do you believe in the theory of evolution? Well, first of all, this is not a matter of belief. Belief is something that you do when there is no evidence. But evolution is something that is a process that takes place in the natural world, and therefore you're looking at the evidence for evolution, not belief. And then
you accept the facts, you accept the evidence for it.
And
it's not about belief.
And then they tell you it is just a theory. And I pursued that, and I said, so do you think that being a theory means that it might be a lie? And they said yes. So the idea of a theory as a structure that is based on facts and observations and so on is not clear in their minds. And they do not, they feel that all theories are the same. Well, if the evolution theory is the only scientific theory that we have in this domain. And this is something that the students have to be clear about.
And I would like to actually follow up on that by saying, well, two things. One, theory. The way that we use the word theory is a little distorted. Because a theory is the highest form of scientific, or shall we say, if something becomes a theory, then it has achieved the maximum amount of evidence possible in order for us to accept it. If something is a scientific theory, that means we have no better explanation, but we have tried to come up with many different ones, and all the evidence keeps pointing in this direction. The only thing is that when it comes to the scientific method realizes that there can always be improvement. That's why things are not set in stone. That's why it's a theory that can be challenged. It is open to being questioned. Calling something a theory in the scientific sense does not mean that it is unproven. It means that it has reached the highest level of proof possible for it to be accepted as reality. Now, at the risk of losing half of you, the question of religion is interesting because a lot of people will use it as an authority. A lot of people will use religion. They will take it, they will distort it, they will use it for their own selfish ends to try and convince people of their particular brand of woo, of pseudoscience. And this is a very good example. And you're right that people will find this very difficult. They will find this, and I'm sure that a lot of people are now shifting uncomfortably in their seats as I say this. No, not at all. No. But in a lot of situations, you will find this. Whenever this becomes the topic of conversation, can we talk about this? Is this acceptable? Are you now saying that you know better than this person? Are you saying that, are you defying what God says? It becomes that because some people will use that, they will use religious authority as a cloak. And these people, we need to remember, are using religion. They are the ones who are harming it by using it as their source of authority. You've really picked a great time to come and film me. I know. Hang on a second. Let's take another question.
Now it's politics.
Yes, now it's politics. Okay. Let's move to the trifecta. Yes, please.
No, it's not important. I have a very strong voice. I don't need this.
Good for you. This is actually, sorry, this is actually for the recording because they'll take the output from there. Thank you.
The thing
For
is that
posterity.
I don't think that we have to teach our students to look for only the theory or the person or it's a religious or a politic, whatever. We have to teach them to look at every little thing in a different way. So if that religious person said that one thing wrong and he was proven wrong, the thing with us that we judged and we put a big cross on everything that the person that had said. So if we have to teach them that if I said something wrong, that does not mean I am a bad person or I am using religion or my education or my politics in a bad way. The thing,
It's about nuance.
yes, what nuance or what. The other thing, I think if I want to teach my students or my kids at home to be that and to look for the right news, the right way, the right person, I have to model it. Because I see it at home when my kids would bring me a video or a picture and I would say, did you check? Did you see that? And I see it on Twitter and I see it on Facebook. We post things and I know that on WhatsApp I can send now my mother and her friends that they have found that ملوخية is the best thing to, if you eat ملوخية 7 days, this will cure your knees and you will go on a marathon.
You know, I've actually come across that.
Yeah.
Not kidding.
So that's-
Somebody said that to me.
Yes, I know that. And I'm sure that my mother-in-law will bring ملوخية and for 15 days and she will, and that's it. But because I said that does not mean I am a bad person. So if I want to teach them, I have to begin with myself. So
very good
it's
point.
not, it begins a little higher. Let's begin with, are we doing this? Then we are telling our students or our children, and sometimes we tell them, but it's our point of view of that thing that dominates what we tell them. Are
And
we
that's
fair?
why we need to check our biases.
Yes. Are we fair when we are teaching them? This is the big.
Absolutely. And from what you said, I mean, do keep in mind that we are authority figures for these students. We are the people they look up to for information. So it is very important that we are being as rigorous or even more rigorous with ourselves than we are with them. Or at the very least that we are able to recognize the fact that we are fallible and can make mistakes.
Make excuses to people. People make mistakes, but they are not bad at the end.
Though, to be fair, the example of the gentleman he brought up has made a living out of selling and peddling this.
I know that it's not that gentleman.
Yeah.
It's we
Yeah.
generalize
بنشطب.
everything. Yes.
بنشطب
البني
على
آدم هذا ما بيفهم خلاص بنحط ونكبر.
Let's have some more
This
charity.
is how we deal with everyday.
No, that's a very good point.
دغري نقول عن الزبد ما نفهم ولا.
No, thank you. This is basically the Jordanian attitude towards doctors. هذا الدكتور ما بيفهم. Exactly. When they make one mistake. Absolutely. No, absolutely. Even without mistakes. هذا الدكتور ما بيفهم.
If my gut feels that this is not right medicine for me.
Yeah. It's from your gut. Exactly. Thank you.
I'm no longer, thank God, in the classroom doing damage to our youth. But I do, I'm an administrator, and I was thinking, I had been there. Yeah.
Okay.
But no, what I'm thinking is that we're talking about classroom or we're talking about at home, and I'm thinking of school policy and academic honesty or dishonesty or malpractice. And I think we as teachers and administrators or just people involved in the world and maybe we can approach it in a way in school to make staff aware of what is reality or what may not be reality or what's debatable, but maybe from a philosophical point that's embedded in policy, which leads to professional development and discussion. But to me, this conversation, as someone who has to look at policy and use the whip, I'm wondering about the actual policy here. What is academic honesty and dishonesty? And if we're teaching those skills, maybe we can get them early on in the primary school about looking at multiple views, multiple sources, and challenging and creating a culture where that's safe and okay in the classroom and in school. I think a lot of us me as a secondary teacher, think about, oh my God, your extended essay and you've done this the wrong way, and you talk about people being defensive, which is half my family, and I'm thinking that maybe if we start this early on through a curriculum or through a policy, which is of course the same, intimately connected, that maybe we can deal with that and address it early on. Thank you for that, listening to that ramble. And
No, absolutely. That is very true. We need to teach these skills early on. And you remind me of this fantastic saying, stealing ideas from one person is plagiarism, stealing from many is research. To be fair, this is kind of true. But I mean, the line between that, it's sometimes very, very clear. Like, for example, if you copy and paste a section from Wikipedia, that's plagiarism. But sometimes it can become pretty blurry. If you are using somebody else's idea, but you don't realize that it's somebody else's idea and you think you got to it to be on your own, that's where it can become nebulous. But you're right, these things do need to be embedded from a very early age. We need to teach kids the importance of information literacy, the importance of understanding how these things need to work. And embedding it in policy is probably the most effective way to ensure continuity and to ensure that everybody is working on this. But I don't think it's quite at the level where people accept how important it is. So that's on you now. We have about 6 minutes left, so I think these might be the last two questions.
I just want to say about my experience. I used to be falling into this fake news and things like that. And Yousef is my friend in personal life. And I was outside of the country. And every time I post something, Yousef will come back to me and said, no, this is not true, Salam. This is not right. And I learned something out of that as a teacher, if I become this critical for my students, they will be thinking before posting things or looking for things. So my role as a teacher is to look at my friend, my students, and I start looking at everything that they're saying and things like that, and I challenge them that if it's the truth or not. I think this is our role, to make it for our students, just to be critical about the information that they bring and from where you are bringing them. Thank you.
But to be fair, make sure that you are being a critical friend, because I was going to make a crack about how not many people like me on social media specifically because of this. But it's not a joke. I have had people come back to me and say, you're being condescending. You make everybody feel like an idiot. You're trying to make people feel like idiots by fact-checking them all the time. And I understand that. I understand why people think that. It's not my intention, but they have a valid point of view. I am being this guy who's coming up out of nowhere going, actually, what you're saying is not true. This is fake news. And because of the anonymity of the internet, because you don't have that face-to-face interaction, they don't see me as going, actually, that's not true, as opposed that's what I think I sound like. What they think I sound like is, you're stupid. Which is, again, there's a big thing. So when you're being critical, be a critical friend. Be friendly about it. Sorry, I think our last question. Yes.
One more point, that we have to encourage our students to just look for the facts, not for any kind of information that could support their opinion. Because sometimes when they will have some projects or something that they have to look for, they will start looking for a kind of information that could just support their point of view. And that could be, that's for them, it's perfect. They find the solution, they answer the question, and that's it.
It's that echo chamber.
Yeah, so we have to just motivate them and challenge them to look for the facts, for the truth, not for any kind of information could and support your opinion.
And this is where it gets tricky, because even in academia, even when you come to university level, you are often not taught this. You are told to go out and find information that supports your point, but you're not encouraged to go out and find information that doesn't support your point. And it gets even more interesting when you think that sometimes you're looking for information that doesn't support your point, and you're creating false balance, because that information is not necessarily reliable or good or of high enough quality. So there really is so much room to play around with this and to teach our children different skills. I think that's time for us. But ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to sit and chat for a bit, I am more than happy. Thank you very much for being here. You are fantastic.